We are live. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I hope everyone is well. Ramadan Mubarak. And just welcome to today's show. Today I have a very special guest, a lovely sister by the name of Aisha Nadeem. Assalamu alaikum, sister. How are you? Hope you're well.
Waalaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to jump in. I know this is my personally first time live on any sort of live stream.
Thank
Um,
you.
so this is exciting. I'm excited to kind of dive through and chat with you. So thank you
Yeah,
for
I
having
think
me.
sometimes when you do a live, it's a little bit more authentic. Like you can
Yeah,
sort of see, like bounce off each other. It's a bit more like, you don't think everything's been edited out. So I do enjoy doing lives more. I think it's better to watch as well for the audience. So
yeah,
inshallah, this will
yeah.
be fun.
I'm
I've
excited.
seen I've seen your content pop up a lot on my suggested videos, which is where I sort of got to know you. And I particularly like the videos that you've done, on your hijab journey.
Mhm.
You've talked about dealing with one's akhirah as well as how Muslim women should conduct themselves on social media. And
Yeah.
all of these topics are really juicy topics. So
Mhm.
I do
Mhm.
want to get into all of them. But before we get into all of them, let's talk about you. Let's talk about Aisha. I want to know a wee bit more about you, sister. You
Yeah.
are a Pakistani American based in the
Yes.
West Coast, so based in the US, and I'm Pakistani too. So that's sort of like a little bit of a what's the word I'm looking for?
It-
Similarity. That's what
yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
Similarity. Sorry, went out of my mind there. Can you share what it was like growing up as a Pakistani in the US and just describe what the general Pakistani community is like over there?
For sure, yeah. So it's a crazy mouthful. And in undergrad, I would always sort of like identify as like a Muslim woman,
Mm,
Pakistani American, and there's so many labels being thrown around. But at the end of the day, like really, my identity is Muslim first. So whether that is any sort of other component of who makes me who I am, kind of takes second to
mm,
the dean. But that being said, like I am, Pakistani American. I'm first generation American here. My parents were immigrants from Pakistan, and so obviously there is a cultural difference when it comes to being a Pakistani Muslim in the States. Not that like culture is takes second, but the way people were raised here are different. Even sometimes when I go back home to Pakistan and visit my family there that still kind of reside there is a culture shock because there
mhm,
is a difference in nuance of what it entails to grow up in the States.
mhm,
But generally, like, alhamdulillah, like I've been blessed in this part of the West Coast that I reside in for the not only the Muslim community to be very big, but also generally the Pakistani community that I've grown up with and been raised. And I don't have any first cousins or, immediate blood relatives in any of the states. They're all
mhm,
scattered throughout the world. But to that regard, because of the environment I grew up in, I we can say, like, my family can say that we still have family, like, the
yeah,
folks that are around us have come to be family,
yeah,
and have shown up in different times in different spaces in ways that, like, alhamdulillah, like, may Allah bless them for the role that they have played in my life and my family's life. But generally the Pakistani community is strong in terms of like really being a parent in organization and community building. But of course, there's nuances about, what role does culture play? What role does Islam play? And that's like, I think, a separate discussion to have happen because there are different environments and different spaces where there might be a clash between those two. But the
mhm.
way that I was raised specifically, and, I went to an Islamic school most of my life, like I said, religion always took precedence over any other component of my identity, and that includes my cultural roots as being a Pakistani Muslim woman.
And I think even over here, I think sometimes for me growing up, it was like, what is your identity? Like you said, you're a Muslim first, but then are you Pakistani? Am I
Yeah.
British? Am I Scottish? And it's hard to fit in because I don't know. For me, it was like I was third generation. So my
Wow.
parents were born and brought up here. I was born and
Wow.
brought up here. So it was my grandparents that came over. So that was even more harder because we
Mhm.
had Pakistani culture, but we also had a lot of Scottish culture, British
Mhm.
culture as well. So
Yeah.
and I've never been back to Pakistan, since I was about 2. So
Yeah.
I really sort of struggled with that.
Mhm.
I sort of relate to that. But again, I think a lot of that is, cultural things. And I think we do have to
Mhm.
separate the two. I think we have to think about Islam, our deen.
Yeah.
And even for my daughters, I was explaining to my eldest daughter, she's only 3, and I was saying
Mhm.
to you're Pakistani and you're British, but you're
Yeah,
a Muslim first. You're first a Muslim. So, you
absolutely.
just have to explain to them from such a young age so they know
Mhm.
what they are. But that's amazing to hear that you've got friends that have become family, alhamdulillah. Sometimes they're the best people
Yeah,
when you get to pick who you want to have.
yeah, exactly,
Um,
exactly.
but what really stood out to me about your story was that you attended, like you said, an Islamic elementary school.
Mhm,
We
mhm.
call it primary school over here in the UK. But then what I found interesting was that you attended a non-Islamic high school.
Yes,
Well, like
yes.
I said, I've got 2 young daughters, and right now, we're looking at potential schooling options.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
me and my husband are thinking about, whether we will send them to Islamic schools in the West, or should
mhm.
we put them into just homeschooling,
Yeah,
or doing hijrah to a Muslim country and raising our kids there, inshallah.
yeah.
It's interesting to speak to someone that's been sort of on 2 ends of the coin. So what was your experience like attending a Muslim primary school compared to attending a non-Muslim high school?
Yeah, so in the States, like I said, I don't know what it transfers over to, but I was in Islamic school from preschool, so Montessori all the way up until 8th grade, right? So right before my high school years.
Right.
And so that was like 11 years, I think I calculated,
Mhm.
of my life where I was immersed in, Islamic education and knowledge seeking, to the point where, subhanAllah, like, especially with the West Coast, like the narrative that is out there in terms of the area that I live in about it being sort of very non-diverse, to me, that
Mhm.
I didn't see that. And I know it might be like a very I was in a bubble and I was naive to sort of the nuances in the discourse, but to me, like, the place that I grew up in was so diverse because I was exposed to Muslims of all backgrounds, of all
Mhm.
races, of all ethnicities, all the way up until I was like 13. That's a taste
Mashallah.
of the environment and the day-to-day that I was like tasting. And really, like, that made I tell this to everybody. I wouldn't be who I am without sort of that background and that backdrop of learning my deen, like,
Mhm.
at a very early age. To
Mhm.
compare that to my 4 years of high school in a public school, a non-Muslim sort of like space, where, had I not had that instilled in me in a very early age, I would have struggled a lot more in high school. But I
Mhm.
don't wanna discredit sort of the experience of that environment, because when I was going through that part of my education, there wasn't a normalized concept of Islamic high school. I know that's a more recent thing that has sort of emerged, as people have kind of just realized the importance of,
Yeah.
Islamic education. So that was not even an option at the
Yeah.
time when I was kind of navigating. My parents were navigating where to send me. Um, and so that being said, like, at least alhamdulillah, I had that background of elementary and middle school and all those years. Because for the first time in high school and in those years that I wasn't surrounded with hijabis and people that looked like me, what I realized though, and I wanna, like, highlight this, is I was choosing to be Muslim. That was the first time in my life
Mm.
that, and not that, like, school pushed, compulsed us to be the best, like, but I'm saying that for the first time, I decided, like,
Mm.
really for myself, without any Islamic teachers watching me or my parents being at, my obviously, I was going to school alone, so, um I chose to be Muslim. Like, it was the first time I was having conversations about making sure that I made Dhuhr Salah at
Mm.
school.
Wow.
I was making sure that, like, even if my friends were not eating halal, that, like, I would still eat, halal.
Mhm.
Like, all these things that, like, you never thought about, I
Mm.
never had to think about prior to coming to those high school years. And
Mm.
still, like, you think about it, I was 13, 14 entering that stage
Yeah.
of education, and it was like, at that point, I was a woman in sort of, and I realized that knowing that my deeds were, like, literally being held accountable, even enhanced that understanding of, I need to choose to be Muslim and I need
Mhm.
to choose to be my best version of myself in this
Mhm.
space, especially when things got hard.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think that providing that sort of background allow me to not, now that I was, I went to university, alhamdulillah, I've have finished that now, but, in spaces that become even bigger in your sort of education career,
Yeah.
as it builds up, I still go back to the idea that I had a foundation. in who
Yes.
I was as a Muslim. And as you get older, you ideally are learning more, but that requires you to choose Allah. That requires you to seek educate like Islamic knowledge elsewhere. And so alhamdulillah, I'm really involved in generally still the Muslim community and where I live in because now that I'm out of I'm out of school. I've alhamdulillah finished up my career in sort of getting in degrees and stuff that like now that I'm working, how else am I fulfilling my like thirst for knowledge? And that's really attending halaqas, studying online and doing all these other things. But that principle of wanting to do it myself and being motivated to please Allah really kind of speaks to early years of having to navigate that really young, like maybe 10, like 12 years ago.
MashaAllah. And that's a big thing. Like we talk a lot about that as a family. And I talk to other parents about that, about having that foundation. Because I think a lot of parents think, oh, like, when they're older, we'll talk to them about it. But no, having that foundation, like you said, from the beginning, because like, my daughters, their brains are like sponges. They pick everything up. Alhamdulillah, they already read, their salah and they
Yeah.
know like Surah Fatiha and things like that. So they're already learning these things. So it's so important to talk about these things first. But one of the things I get a lot of parents saying to me is that if they put their children into Islamic schools, when it's time for university, they have to socialize with non-Muslims. So
Yeah.
like you said, then they have to navigate their way through things
Yeah.
like halal meat and not halal meat. So how did you find going to a high school where all of a sudden it was not everyone wore hijab and you
Yeah.
didn't have halal meat? Like, was that a bit of a shock, or did you get sort of prepped before that? Did your parents sort of prepare you and things like that?
Yeah, so I am blessed to have that, like, my older sister. I'm a middle child of 3 daughters in the household, and so I wasn't the first one to kind of navigate this, and I watched from afar. She's much older than me in terms of, like, the age gap, and so I really watched from afar her navigating those high school years, well ahead before I even entered upon it, and so it was like a lesson learned that she went through that, like, alhamdulillah, like, obviously lessons have been passed down to me, but, um I was perhaps mentally, even actually from like middle school, like the teachers when we were in 8th grade and you're graduating and you're moving on, right? A lot of the like Islamic teachers that I had there kind of did that discussion. Like, our parents supplicated, I mean, not like supplemented that sort of like sit down and here's what high school is going to be like. But a lot of that was initiative taken from the school when I
MashaAllah.
was like, graduating from, prepping us with all the what are they like talking points, like skill sets to have those conversations and handle those discourses when you got into those spaces. And like I said, and to your point about, having these conversations with parents, it's really interesting. I'm obviously not a parent, but I look into my parents as really role models because I think about how I would have, your environment, the environment that you grow up in really has an impact throughout the entirety of your life. And I applaud really, that I'm older is like what my parents went through about making sure that I did, yes, get my Islamic education, but then also allowing me the opportunity to navigate what feels different because if I jumped right into university being my first ever instance or taste of the secular world, you never know. I mean, I don't like to perhaps reflect on the what if because that's not that what happened. But I think
Yeah.
about like it might have been different. It might have been different having those conversations for the first time by
Yeah.
myself in a setting where these were adults, right? These are adults making decisions. And for me to have, I guess, like a different sort of taste in that freedom later on in my life would have transferred maybe perhaps Allah Alam, like been a little bit different than how it
Yeah.
actually went down. And so even those early years, it's like you need to build your tool, like your skill set, the toolkit. Like what box am I like what like tools am I taking to different spaces? And of course, you're learning continuously, but it's really about the environment that you put yourself in. And I think like even in those secular spaces in education or workforce, like whatever you're gonna step into, you need to make sure that because I always learned this early on, and it's something I still remind myself is you have the capacity to dictate to the extent of how people exist in your life. And so even if you're in the craziest of spaces, you
Yeah.
have in short, like legs, you have your mouth, you have your hands, you have your body to be able
Yeah.
to remove yourself or handle a situation to the best of your capabilities. But some people won't do that, right? And that's where it comes down to you as a person navigating that situation. Is that even if you're in a university setting and you're being exposed to different things for the first time, you can remove yourself. And
Yeah.
it speaks volumes about you and your relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if you can't.
Yes.
Because I know people say, like, there's pressure, there's this and this and this, of course, but there's always there's literally always a way out, and you need to challenge yourself to be able to do
Mhm.
that. And if you're not, like, it's because and it's really, I'm speaking from hindsight knowledge. I've done the university, I've done the whatever, and I know that it's challenging, but there's always,
Yeah.
like, a
It's
way to be able to
it's
navigate.
not it's not impossible. I mean, I went to uni, I went to all non-Muslim schools,
Yeah,
and all around me there were people drinking alcohol,
yeah,
smoking and things like that from a very young age, 13, 14,
yeah,
Muslims as well around me, and people I was friends with. And I never put myself in that situation. I never was
yeah,
around that because
yeah,
I didn't want to be, and my relationship with Allah has always been there. It might not have been
yeah,
as strong. It might have sort of fallen here and there, like we all do. We all go
yeah,
through that journey. But I was always aware that Allah is watching me, and
yeah,
there is a reason why Allah told us not to do these things. And
yeah,
inshallah, my daughters will follow suit and do the
yeah,
same.
sure. Yeah,
But it is, like you said, it's a scary time, and some people don't have the confidence in themselves, don't have that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they don't. And it's sad, it is really sad. But it's
yeah,
good to have conversations like this from people that have gone through, like both ends. You've gone through Islamic school and non-Islamic, so you know how it is.
yeah,
So with everything going on in schools in the West just now, which I'm
yeah,
sure you're aware of, it's
yeah,
very different from when I was at school.
yeah,
Probably the same for you. I mean, you can even look back and say secular schools promoted a lot of haram even back then, like I was
yeah,
just talking about. But these
mhm,
days, it is like on another scale. Like
yeah,
I'm actually scared for our kids and for our kids'
mhm.
kids. So, how did attending an Islamic school shape you as an adult? And would you recommend it for Muslim parents to enroll their kids into faith schools? Like, would you recommend this? Would you do this for your own children when they,
Yeah,
inshallah,
yeah.
when you have some one day?
Yeah, inshallah. No, inshallah. Yes, absolutely. And I think I alluded to this earlier. Is like I really wouldn't be who I was without
Yeah.
that background. And the thing is that, like, everyone in my cohort that sort of went through the same thing, like, of course, everyone's on a different journey, but a
Mhm.
lot of that plays in the environment that, like, they then put themselves into. And so,
Mhm.
of course, I know that, like, you hear it, right? Like, this girl who's at Sunday school is doing something secret behind those doors, right? And, like, that narrative exists, right? But
Yeah.
alhamdulillah, for me, like, that wasn't the case. That really, like, this education, this environment that I was immersed in has still played a huge impact in who I am today as an adult. And I'm still, subhanAllah, involved in that school, in that masjid, because it was
Oh,
connected to the masjid.
mashallah.
Like, that is still my community. I go to currently, like, in Ramadan, I go to Tarawih there, like, every night, and I'm still very in tune and connected to this space, that really shaped me, to this day. And so absolutely, like, um, definitely, depending on, that process of what that looks like for inshallah, my children, something that I've always feel like it's a non-negotiable for myself,
Mhm.
about making sure that, they're raised in the right environments. And if for some reason that isn't Islamic school, I think it's still going to be supplemented with, like, very much like Islamic education being the forefront of at least the very early years of prime, like, development years of their, childhood, is top of mind for me, just because I've seen an impact on my own self. And I know that there's, things there's always a concern with Islamic education and schooling
Yeah.
when it, like, those early years, about, are they getting the right, are they getting enough all
Mhm.
these talking points, and I understand that, but that can always be sort of like, um combated by just doing extra sort of, like, studies
Research.
as
Mhm.
needed. I think the advantage of having the Islamic education far greatly outweighs the fact that perhaps maybe their secular, like, English isn't as,
Yes.
or they're not learning enough science, like, or all these other discussions that can always be, like,
Yeah.
added, in a way that, like, us as parents perhaps can't supplement the Islamic
Mhm.
education component in
Yeah.
ways that teachers can do that.
Yeah.
And so, inshallah, like, whatever happens will happen. But uh, exposing children at an early age is honestly super important, to have that exposure to Islamic education in the right manner, right? You need
Yeah.
a vet check what education they're
Yeah.
receiving, living and things like that and what school they're in. But, inshallah, like if it's a great environment, then I only see benefit.
Yeah, inshallah. And, I hope that a lot of people take this conversation and think maybe I'll look into it if they're not already looking into it, because it does matter. What we do now will matter in future generations. Like, your parents had the initiative to put you into Islamic school. Now, inshallah, you'll do that for your kids, and inshallah, they'll do that for their own kids. And that will sort of get the ball rolling and hopefully bring us back from wherever we're getting pulled into, because astaghfirullah, there's a lot going on just now.
Yeah.
So it is a bit mad. But I wanted to delve in further into wearing the hijab, which I'm interested also in relating sort of schooling, about whether there was a lot of kids at that young age wearing the hijab. We're both lifelong Muslim women, and like yourself, I haven't always worn the hijab. So I grew up with quite liberal parents, However, they're closer to Deen now as they're getting older. My mum just returned from Umrah, alhamdulillah. So, the journey into embracing Islamic dress code has a lot more to do with setting a good example for my daughters. And I think that's what really changed things for me. And I've heard you speak about your parents always been practicing Muslims, subhanAllah. You were just talking now about how great role models they are. So can you briefly share your hijab story? And did your mother's example of wearing the hijab have a massive part in you being a full-time hijabi as an adult?
Yes. A lot of that exposure to hijab being more than hijab, right? Like that understanding of what hijab means, like I said, happened very early in my early years of Islamic education. And so I've explained this in the content that you're sharing and alluding to on my YouTube channel. It's the fact that and subhanAllah, like I know Muslim women really have a hard time in understanding the obligation to hijab, but alhamdulillah, because of the knowledge that I had in very early years, it was never a question or debate for myself about whether I have to wear hijab. It was always just like getting to a point where I could commit to it. Whereas I think the narrative sometimes now is a little bit different, is like, I don't need to wear hijab, like all these things. And I challenge is like, that was never, alhamdulillah, never the case. I never had internal qualms about just like what the hijab meant and things like that. It was always like, what was the right opportunity? And alhamdulillah, when I finally put it on, I realized that like, if not now, when? Because I kept putting it off in that sense of like, now's not the time, now's not the time, now's not the time. And then when you get really into that cycle, it's like, well, you don't know if tomorrow is actually coming. Right. And when I really had and subhanAllah, there were signs leading up to me putting on the hijab. Is like, I went to halakas and for some reason the conversation was about hijab, or I saw a video about hijab, and things were just like really being at the forefront of this like time frame of myself. And I want to acknowledge the fact that I was never pressured into it. And I know that that's also a very difficult conversation and narrative that exists, is like being forced into wearing it. And then that's why people have these moments where it's like, okay, let me take it off and become free, right? Like that's where you see that sort of narrative exists in different parts of different areas. And so I want to say that like, when we think about that, there's no compulsion in Islam, that you and your relationship to Allah is beautiful in the sense that it's individual. As long as you acknowledge that hijab is an obligation, like modesty is thought like a right, like all these things that we need to do, as long as you're not debating that, cool, fine. You don't want to wear it now, whatever, as long as you know that it's a sin, you sin. As long as you're fully aware of these things and you're making an active decision to not then still wear it, that's on you. And that's where I don't perhaps take issue with that, because as long as they're not lying to themselves, because I can't force someone to put on a hijab, but I can have a conversation with them to make sure that they know that they should be wearing it, versus the narrative that is like, let me force someone, all this other stuff. And so to my experiences, my mom wore it. Like she was a very like, she's a doctor, she would do all these things and like all these things. And really a biggest motivating factor about like putting it on. And especially to that point, my parents never forced it upon me. So like I said, when I put on the hijab, really I was putting it on for Allah. Like there was no other sort of factor that went into it. And the fact that like I was ready to finally sort of like commit to whatever that commitment was, but taking that, what I realized was the next step in my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like I wanted to be there, and no matter how hard it could get or would get thereafter, it was always just like reminding myself of the why. And the
Yes.
why is always just like Allah said so. I'm pleasing
Mm.
him by doing it. And khalas. Like that's like
Mhm.
that is why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But all that to say is like alhamdulillah, my experience was, uh supplemented with the fact that like there was no pressure. I already had the education about the why and all these things
Yes.
that were kind of building upon it so that when I put it on, I was doing it, for the right reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's an important thing you said, and I think the other thing is that people think hijab is just a scarf on your head, but it's not.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's your entire being, and it's
Yeah.
modesty and covering yourself up. And there's also a reason of why we do it. Like you said, we do it for Allah, but also why does Allah want us to do it? It's to protect us, it's to keep us safe, it's to protect us from, men's eyes, even though they're taught to lower their gaze. If you're
Mhm.
flaunting everything, then what do you expect? Them to not look.
Yeah.
It's definitely a massive topic, and I think nowadays, unfortunately, it is more attractive to be very little clothes on, have your hair
Mhm.
out, that when you do wear the hijab, there is sometimes, I mean, I have had struggled with it when I first put it on because I was so used to not wearing it. And I
Mhm.
was like, oh, but my hair's so long and I don't get to wear it
Yeah.
out. And my husband might not like it. And alhamdulillah, if you have good people around you, that makes a massive difference.
Yes.
Alhamdulillah,
Yes.
my husband has always encouraged me to wear it. He
Yeah.
always tells me how beautiful I look with it on. And that's a big thing for a married woman because obviously we got married and I didn't wear it. So for him to think like that, it's encouraging. And even if you've got parents that are encouraging, friends that are encouraging, tell you how good you're looking at, that makes a big difference. And it makes you think, okay, I actually suit this, do different styles. So it's definitely a big discussion. And I do encourage anyone that's struggling to just try it, even just put it on when you go down to the supermarket. You find that it's because that's how I started. I did it bit by bit. And I don't know if that's the right way of doing it, but that's how I started. I started doing it for like a Monday class that I took my
Yes.
girls to. And then obviously when you read Salah, I would keep it on and I would go to the supermarket with it. And then naturally it just came part of my being. So
Yeah.
yeah, everybody's journey is different. But
Yeah.
alhamdulillah, I'm so glad that you going to school encouraged you and seeing your mum. That's made me happy as well. Because obviously I'm a mum. So I'm like, okay, maybe my girls will think like that of me.
Yeah. Yeah. Alhamdulillah, right? Like
Yes.
it's just about everyone has their own journey. And as long as environment, like you said, environment plays a huge role in that. And for me, like I put it on in the near end of high school years. It was before university that I put it on. And I came back after, like the winter break. And in my last semester of like graduating high school, I was wearing a
Really?
hijab.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really like for
Mashallah.
4 years, right? Like 3 and a half, however long I
Mm.
knew these people around me in high school. I asked myself, like, if putting on to them, right, looking a little bit different or putting on a cloth on my head or whatever, change the relationship or their impression or their view of me, then I don't want, like, they were never meant to be in my life. Like, why do I need them in my life then? And so for me, it was like, like if I show up differently and I receive different sentiments, then it speaks volumes on their
Yes.
character and not mine. Like, and alhamdulillah, like none of that was an issue. Like really like and then I think about like why didn't I put it on sooner? Right? Like
Yeah.
cuz all that negative
It's
self-talk
still in
is
your
really
head.
just
Yeah.
self-talk. It's just self-talk. And I don't want to discredit sort of like the struggles or especially in the West, right? Being a hijabi in the West and different countries have different sort of whatever, right? I don't want to discredit that and I don't want to invalidate that like being a visible Muslim in today's age and time is a
Mhm.
difficult thing to kind of like grasp. But
Mhm.
you're struggling with it and it's going to be rewarded for it, right? So like we are being motivated continuously by the mercy and the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I know that it's hard, but really I kind of think about it as like I could have done it sooner, and
Yeah.
that's like the only and
Yes.
I talk to so many other hijabis, right?
Yeah,
And
I'm
they've
going
been
to.
on their own journey. And the first thing we kind of like share in this sentiment is like, dang, what was the big what was
Yeah, nobody cares.
no,
Yeah.
exactly. Nobody cares. As much as like it's a big thing online
Yeah.
in the media, it's not
And
maybe you're going to be stared at a little bit weirdly at the store or whatever.
yeah.
And I know there's a really big narrative that is being heightened with like the issues in Palestine. And I know that being even more visibly Muslim and being so open and advocating for something that is literally like justice. Like we're doing it for like our brothers and sisters there. I know that there was an increase in heightened in about just Islamophobia and especially like hijabi violence. And so I know, like I said, not discrediting anything, but when you do something for the sake of Allah, like He will take care of you.
Mm. Yeah, subhanallah, you're so right. And yeah, it is a shame that people do go through that, but I do think a lot of it is your own brain, your own thinking, because I went through the exact same thing. I remember going to the supermarket with the on thinking everyone was staring at me, but really nobody cares. Everybody's just doing their own thing. So subhanallah, I'm glad you've shared that. So hopefully that'll help other women that are struggling with it. I want to move on and talk about employment and entrepreneurship when it comes to
Yeah.
Muslim women. I see that your brand encourages this,
Yeah.
mashallah, which is really good. And in regards to work, it is permissible for Muslim women to work outside the home. I think a lot of people
Yeah.
sometimes think that that's not allowed, but no.
Exactly. Yeah.
But as long as sort of the conditions set by Islamic Sharia law are observed, then you should
Yeah.
be, as long as you know what you're doing, what's right and wrong. Like we
Yeah.
talked about covering yourself up and, not being a source of temptation, thinking about who you mingle with, mingling with men that are, if you're not married, things
Yeah.
like that. And obviously putting your husband and your children first before your job. One of the best examples of Muslim women that were successful in business was Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's first wife, Khadija, radiallahu anha, may Allah be pleased with her. So if Muslim women choose not to work, that's totally okay too.
Yes. Yeah.
If you want to focus on your family, as Islamically, it is the husband or the father's obligation to provide. But what are your thoughts on Muslim women who do wish to work and who are really career focused and want to run a business? Because I think there's also a stereotype on career women that don't want to get married.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think I'm echoing everything you're kind of set the foundation for in this conversation, is that like as long as you're very aware about just you fulfilling the rights upon Allah, rights upon others, and if you are married, I'm not married currently, but fulfilling the rights upon your spouse, as long as you're doing all of that, then we have so many numerous examples of women in the Prophet ﷺ's time, like you mentioned, that were doing these things as well, right? And so I give kudos. I give kudos to women who want to champion sort of like who are career oriented. And my channel kind of like has those skill set building workshops to help with resumes, to help with elevator pitches and all these networking and all these things, because a lot of my experience in undergraduate and graduate studies that I was doing kind of like, I mean, I studied business. So like it was, network is all about how you put yourself out there in the career world. And so as long as you're being, like you said, attuned to those environments that you're putting yourself in as a Muslim woman, go run a business, go do what you need to do and accomplish your own goals. Because here's the thing, like, I think what I really challenged myself with and kind of like had to have those internal conversations was about financial wealth and building for my own self as a currently single woman, right? It's not something understanding that like building wealth and sustaining yourself in the lifestyle that you want to maintain is permissible as long as you're doing it in the right ways, in accordance with, the Sharia. Like, I think I was always so shy to kind of think about like, I want to run my business. I want to pursue my career and these things, because originally there was a lot of like pushback in earlier sort of generation thinking and the stereotypes of that women can't do that. And once we have, I think in our today's time, we've pushed against that. I think the next thing now that we're seeing is the pushback, like you said, is like, okay, well, career, not marriage. And I think that's a problematic issue that has now stemmed in Western discourse and especially with like what Muslim women are dealing with. But I will say that like it comes at also a similar attack on women who don't want to work. And I think that's also an issue as well. It's like, why are we jumping on several different extremes when our religion always has told us to be moderate and kind of be in the middle of things? And so both can coexist. You don't need to work, you can work. And as long as you are fulfilling what you need to fulfill, then like do what you need to do. But my channel really, and the content that I try to support and provide is like, if Muslim women can't find these resources from other Muslim women, oftentimes they're going to rely on Western conversations about what does financial building look like? What does career progression look like? What does all these growth look like? And that's where it gets confusing, because like if you're finding resources about entrepreneurship, business building, brand building, all these other things from, of course, professionals and experts in, but they're providing you a sort of naturally clouded bias perspective from the non-Muslim world, how
Yes.
do you then take that and then apply it into sort of the work that you want to do as,
Mhm.
as a Muslim woman? And so ideally, like, that's what I'm trying to provide, is like a safe space for Muslim women who are trying to sort of advance themselves in their careers. Or, and I like to kind of in my channel talk about, like, it encompasses everything: professional, personal, spiritual development, right? Like, your best Muslim self is all these different facets of different
Mhm.
parts of your life. And if you can kind of attune, focus on it from what Islam permits, then ideally, you'll see the benefit in different spaces.
Alhamdulillah. And I'm so glad you're doing that, because if I'm honest, I've not seen many women do that. And I
Yeah.
think, like you said, it's so important, because people do depend on the Western side of things, especially for women. And it is, there are rules in place, there are laws in
Yeah.
place, and there are things that we need to follow as Muslim women. So I really do respect that you're talking about this, and hopefully, inshallah, it's helping loads of women. And I know that was something that jumped out of me when I saw your content. So alhamdulillah, I'm really glad that you're doing that, sister. It's a really good topic to discuss. I've just got a little super chat from Polly J. Ramadan Mubarak. Ramadan Mubarak to you. I hope you're having a wonderful Ramadan, inshallah. Next thing I want to talk to you about, I saw a video where you
Mhm.
spoke about facing some anti-Muslim discrimination on a school trip. And I was
Mhm.
quite sad when I saw this video, about how you were dressed. It was a boy from another school who stereotyped you as an extremist.
Mhm.
I've never really faced anything as strong as that. You know, subhanallah, thank gosh. But how have you faced any Islamophobia recently online or in the workplace or just in general as a person? And how do you deal with it? For anybody that may be struggling, like we talked about this time with everything going on in Palestine, may Allah
Mhm.
bring ease upon their pain. Just been heightened Islamophobia around the world. So how do you deal with that, sister?
Yeah, so I think, the instance that you're referring to happened in early on. I was actually, it was a field trip that I was on with the Islamic school that I was going to. So it was like very early. I think I was fifth grade, and I don't know how old you're in fifth grade, but it was very early elementary, like primary years,
Yeah.
where I didn't, and that's the thing, I didn't understand what it was. In hindsight, I can kind of pinpoint and label it as an Islamophobe being,
Mhm.
whatever. But at the time, it was a huge thing to kind of deal with in terms of an identity uh,
Mm.
crisis, for lack of, like,
Yep.
what does he mean? Because that was the first time I was hearing those words of,
Yeah.
"Are you a terrorist?" All these narrative that, like, post 9/11 world, we've always sort of been attuned to, but I really didn't understand it at the time. And so it was more so a learning curve, like a learning experience about, because like I said, I grew up perhaps in a bubble because
Yeah.
of, that Islamic education.
Mhm.
So, these instances where it's like, okay, there's a real world, like there's a discourse out there that I have never been exposed to before. And so, like, thereafter, and of course it wasn't going to happen in fifth grade, but it was like, because of early experience like that, and that was really honestly the only, at the time, the most sort of apparent one that I've had. It was just about, like, entering in these, like, secular spaces where communication became really important, and then
Yeah.
simultaneously knowledge, like confidence in being
Mm.
Muslim, was super important, because of course there's so many things that happen online in, like, the narrative that is out there and perpetuated by the media. I
Yes.
studied communication in my undergraduate studies, and so I know top of mind the role that media plays in sort of like narrative, stereotype, whatever is being disseminated and communicated
Mhm.
with the world. And so it really takes an understanding of, what does Islam actually say? You know,
Mhm.
like, because if you don't know, when
Yes.
you are faced with those questions or
Yeah.
those comments or whatever, it's going straight to your own nafs. Like,
Mm.
like, it's shaitan adding to the fire, that maybe perhaps those doubts that were already there are being
Yes.
even enlightened. And it's just a test, right? It's a test about your
Mhm.
own iman and your, faith. But how do you handle those when you don't know right from wrong
Mm.
as well? And so a lot that to say is, like, if I engage in, or am faced with sort of like online commentary, because alhamdulillah I've received only few online comments, but of course that's online. I generally always like do not even think twice about them. But when it comes to the physical confrontations, like the in-person conversations, I am very accustomed to understanding how to go about those narratives and conversations, and especially like engaging in taking the right classes if you need, going to the right halakas, providing yourself with, the skill set to have those conversations. Because as a visible Muslim, you are a representative of Islam. Like whether you want that responsibility or not, you have it. You have the fact that you are visibly Muslim, that you are also representative of what our deen is teaching you, and that requires you to know like your deen to the point where you can be able to handle those conversations as well.
Yeah, and I definitely agree, because I think a lot of times when people face Islamophobia, it does affect their iman. I've heard many people talk about, them experiencing Islamophobia at schools, and then when they would go into high school, they would pretend that they're not Muslim. They would pretend they are from a different background, they're Latino or something, and then just to stay away from that sort of Islamophobia, which is really sad, because you should be proud to be Muslim, and it's not about you, it's about that person and how they think and what they feel and how they've been taught in their environment. It's not about you as a Muslim, so you should be confident in who you are. And I just want to say, for any viewers that are dealing with these types of issues, or are dealing with anything we've discussed today, or if you need some tips on how to deal with these things, I've got a free Telegram group which gives access to a network of Muslims. So it's basically all Muslims get together on this group. It's completely free, and we can help and guide each other. The link is in the description. Or if you need more specific advice, then please get in touch. Things concerning relationships, parenting, etc. Please feel free to book a call. The link is also in the description. That group's really good. A lot of people do join it, and there's so many discussions on there. Alhamdulillah, I'm really glad that we've got that group out there. You're such an intelligent young woman, even from having this conversation, mashallah. You seem really intelligent, and you've been brought up very well. Credit to your parents, and of course to you. And as you'll know, sort of marriage and starting a family is a big part of our deen, and we were talking about that throughout the conversation.
Yeah.
So do you have any plans to get married? Because I know what it's like in the Pakistani community. As soon as you've got your degree,
I know, and I just found exactly like when
what's happening?
Exactly with Ramadan, like I start to see aunties regularly at the masjid and stuff. It's like, are you, first thing is like, how's school going? And as soon as I say I'm auntie, I'm done with school, the next question thereafter is like, acha, like are you trying to get married? And I'm like, my answer is whenever happens, as in I'm not anti-marriage. I think a lot of people, like you said, when people are trying to push careers and still focusing on work, it's like people get concerned that they don't ever want to get married. I'm not there. Alhamdulillah, like, I'm single, but whenever, if someone comes my way in the best way possible, and we're meant for each other, then, absolutely. And trying to navigate, that process as well is crazy. But inshallah, like, alhamdulillah, I was able to take a course about fiqh of marriage. And so it was something that I wanted to just know for my own self and kind of understand what the process is like. Cause like I alluded to the beginning, is like, people do it differently, in terms of just like culture versus religion, and kind of like, what does the process look like? What does marriage look like? And even understanding the nuances of marriage, especially with what the marriage institution is now being kind of like debated in the online world and then media. And so like really grounding yourself in what Islam says is important to kind of know.
Yeah. And I think marriage is, excuse me, it's massive. And I think definitely knowing before about what marriage involves is definitely really important. What do you think about the Pakistani sort of wedding process in terms of how it contradicts Islam? Well, how will that be navigated when you inshallah get married?
Yeah, so alhamdulillah, my parents are on board. They already know sort of what, how I envision the process to look like. And a lot of, like I said, my understanding of that process is really based on fiqh, like really based on sort of what are the guidelines of the Sharia are and what Islam says. And so of course, like, I think it's a case by case basis. I think you can obviously generalize that, like, generally when you add in any sort of cultural background, there is a difference and clash when it comes to just the way that is sort of the sunnah way to do things. And as long as it's not completely contradicting what
Mm,
the sunnah says and what Islam says, there's always a room for culture to be, appreciated, right? Like there's not been an issue about not being, proud to be of your culture, but as long as that doesn't interfere with sort of how you're practicing some of these marriage processes, especially with like the nikah and all these kind of things that are like very literally crucial in the sharia. And that's really what is, so making sure you have a valima, but like to the extent of what these events are and how it goes about, like all of that is case by case, and I've seen it be done very differently in different communities, even where I'm in the States and the West Coast. And so alhamdulillah, I know sort of what I want to do. My parents are on board, and so it'll just be about when the right time is.
yeah, inshallah. And I do dua, inshallah, that you will find the perfect person for you. And, may Allah bless that marriage that is going to come, inshallah, one day. I'll be excited to hear that in you, sister. But take your time. Don't
Yeah.
get pushed into
Inshallah, inshallah.
time, inshallah. Yeah, but I do think that the Pakistani wedding sort of issue is a massive thing in culture. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes it can go out of hand, and that's what I'm
Yeah.
sort of meaning. But yeah, it's everybody's separate sort of idea of what they want to do.
Yeah.
Sorry, my cough is just coming right in full force.
No, you're all good.
The most moving videos that really hit home for me was when you spoke about akhirah,
Yeah.
afterlife. And we as Muslims, we know that the afterlife is what we're here for. In this short glimmer of time on this earth, it's the strength and the connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that determines how much you fear death. Because whether you like to admit it or not, it's a daunting prospect, but we're all going to get there. And
Yep.
sometimes you're so attached to the dunya in some capacity that we forget about where we're going.
Yep.
And how to focus on, the afterlife, and how to make sure we get to where we inshallah all want to go. It's quite a scary question, but do you fear death, and how are you preparing for your akhirah in terms of balancing deen and dunya?
Yeah. And of course, it's a huge question, and I'm more than happy to answer because I actually have a video about it. Like, it was last year, like 2023. I feel like, subhanallah, one word that I could describe it, and even in the community that I am, is grief. I think a lot of people were either dealing with loss, seeing what was happening in different, for our ummah, but even like in my immediate community, there was just a lot of loss in last year, and like grief was top of mind. And all that to say is, like, I did a huge reflection video on my channel about generally the concept of death. And like you said, like, yes, like reflecting on it, fearing it, but fearing not perhaps death itself, fearing if I did enough for what comes after death. It's the after, the hereafter, that is more of a not healthy fear, right? Between balancing hope and fear, but that the fear is there enough for me to be motivated to do my best in this life. Because a lot of people, of course, people will say, don't get attached to dunya, like be a stranger in this world, be a traveler in this world. Yes, absolutely. But the crazy thing is, like, when it comes to time, dunya is all you have for you to optimize your sort of hereafter. So like, I think that's what is even more something I think about is like, dunya is important because when you go to the grave, that's it. That's all you sort of like prepped for the hereafter, for the akhirah. And so really, like, when you think about how you're spending your dunya, the time, the day to day, what you're getting up to, the environment you're in, all that to say is, like, when we say don't get attached, it's because you have to remember that from your birth to whenever you're destined to leave this world, that this time in the dunya is, how are you investing this time for the akhirah? Because that's all you have. And that's I think the framework that, and the mindset that I have, is it's not the fear of death, because I'm, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, like, every soul will taste death, right? I was just, subhanAllah, reading that in Ali Imran, like, every soul will taste death. And so that's not a surprise. The fear comes when we ask ourselves and really think about it. Have I done enough? Have I done enough? And you don't know, you like that measure.
Nobody can say they have. Nobody can
Exactly.
say that.
And no one should ever, exactly. You don't know, but no one should ever say that they've done enough, because
Mhm.
you can always do better, right? You can
Yeah.
always be a better version of yourself. That
Mhm.
there's an issue if you be complacent in sort
Yeah.
of your deeds, and that like combating complacency and comfort,
Mhm.
in sort of doing enough is really important. And that's where you have to remind yourself about the next life, about the
Mhm.
akhirah, because there should be enough of a balance between hope, fear, and love of Allah,
Mhm.
that those all work simultaneously for you to continuously want to do better.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, and I'm glad you've done a video about this because, like you, I don't fear death. I fear death now because I've got children, so I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
god, what will happen to them? But I
Yeah.
don't fear death for myself. But I do have that fear of, have I done enough? And I know I haven't. I know I haven't, and I
Yeah.
know I can do so much more. And I think sometimes when you're younger, you just think you've got a lot of time.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just automatically assume that I've got 50 years, 60 years, inshallah, and I'll do it then. And I don't think
Yeah.
that anybody should have that view. I think you should always think of, and it's a scary thing to think that tomorrow might not be here, but it might not be, you don't know what will happen.
Yeah.
We had a family friend a couple of years ago. She went out to get some yogurt. It was during Ramadan. She went out to get some yogurt. She crossed the road, and a street like she crossed 1,000 times. When she crossed back, a car hit her and she fell. And then another car went over her afterwards, and that was her gone.
Oh,
And
no.
she was so young. And I remember, I'll never forget her because she done something that she does every day, and she ended
Yeah.
up, dying on that road. And, you know, I'm sure that if you asked her, she would have said that I've not done enough. And of course, you always think that there's more time, but I'm
Yeah.
glad that you've talked about that because it's a really serious subject. It's not a nice subject to talk about because everybody
Yeah.
wants to think that we're going to be here forever. But like you said, it's a short amount of time.
Mhm.
The dunya isn't important. We are travelers. We come and go. And, alhamdulillah, may Allah bless us all and grant us all a place in Jannah, inshallah,
Amen.
and make us better and guiding us throughout this dunya and make us better
Amen.
Muslims, inshallah. Um,
Inshallah. Amen.
Thank you so much for joining me today, especially during Ramadan. And I know you're working, so you've got a very busy schedule. So I'm really glad that you spent the time to talk to me. I really
Yeah.
liked this discussion, sister. I really enjoyed it. It was really wholesome and really serious topics, but in a way that's not, scary serious.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad that you've done this, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and give you happiness in this life and in the hereafter, inshallah. And please stay in touch, inshallah.
Yes.
It'd be
I mean,
great.
Allahumma, I mean, thank you. Thank you again for having me. I really enjoy this conversation. And like you said, the conversations are where that communication happens in a way that, like, if otherwise doesn't happen,
Yeah.
in different kind of like environments. So kudos to you for having all these conversations with your different guests. And thank you again for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I hope you have a good day for the rest of the day, inshallah. You get to rest, inshallah, and yes, inshallah, we'll speak again soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.